Hello, everybody. Welcome to the History Valley podcast. I'm your host, Jacob Berman. Dr. Price joins us once again. He is a frequent guest of the History Valley podcast, and today we're going to be discussing one of his recently published books, When Gospels Collide. I recommend it. I'll leave the link in the description to it and to his Amazon page. You can go check this book out and the many other books he has published. All right, so that being said, so Dr. Price, in your opinion, what would you say are the most damning contradictions in the Gospels that show that they collide?
Well, one of the biggies is the temple cleansing, where Jesus goes in and trashes the joint. In the Gospel of John, it happens at the beginning of Jesus' ministry, but in all three of the other ones, it happens at the end. And it's pathetic to see scholars try to iron this out by saying, well, I guess he did it twice. It was so much fun the first time, he got nostalgic. But this is just historically unbelievable and unnecessary because if you look at Matthew, Mark, and Luke, he doesn't get away with it. They don't arrest him on the spot, which does seem a bit more likely given the circumstance that they had doubled the troops in the city just in case something like this happened at Passover season. But let's assume they decided, let's get him, as the text says, let's get him later on the sly. We don't want a riot on our hands. All right, what the heck? That's not crazy. But the problem is that is what leads to his death in the Synoptic Gospels. They decided, this is the last straw. And either we can't have this guy around, he's too much of a troublemaker, or he'll actually bring down the Romans on us or whatever, but this is it. We want him doing it all the time. So he doesn't get away with it. Well, if he already had done that something like 2 or 3 years earlier, depending on how you read the references to different Passovers in John, then he couldn't have gotten away with it then either. So you can't get away with it twice if you couldn't get away with it once. And so there's this huge problem with that. You have to take your pick if it happened at all. And that's not clear. There's another huge problem there that, however, is not a contradiction. Given the scope of the envisioned area, the court of the Gentiles, you would need a big armed force to do what it says Jesus did, to prevent anybody from coming in there and bringing the sacrificial vessels back through. He wouldn't let him do it. He must have had guards at the doors. So if the Gospels don't seem to envision that, and the court of the Gentiles was huge. It's like Mark figured it was like Jesus was just disturbing a rummage sale in a church basement, turning over a few card tables with used books on them and such. There are big problems with it in any gospel, but the contradiction between John and the Synoptics undermines and debunks a particular reading of the Gospels, a particular approach. It's like this isn't just some stupid mistake. If you look close, like Rudolf Bultmann and others did, you notice that throughout the Gospel of John, there's all kinds of courtroom language all the time. John testified to me. If I testify to myself, I know it doesn't count, but nonetheless, my Father testifies for me. So-and-so gave witness again and again. It's amazing how many times. And Jesus says something that his critics don't like, and it says they tried to execute him on the spot, stone him to death for blasphemy. And he just gets away. Why is there no hint of this in the others? Well, because John, whoever he was, has decided to make the whole darn story an extended trial narrative. It's like somebody said that the Gospels are passion narratives with long introductions. Well, Bultmann showed that with John, that is especially true. It's not just the passion, like the events leading to the death, but it's the trial narrative spread backwards toward the beginning of it. And because his idea is like he came unto his own and his own received him not. And so he's trying to gain an effect, which he does. It's only once you say, oh, well, wait a minute, this is supposed to be blow by blow history. Obviously, that's not what the writer was trying to do. And you have to ask the same question with something like the Ascension in Luke and Acts. Wait a minute, in Luke, he ascends to heaven on Easter evening, but in Acts, presumably by the same author, it's over a month later. What's the deal? How many times did he ascend? Was he jumping into the heavens all the time like Superman? No, obviously, this author is not trying to write a blow-by-blow description, and if he were, which is the way literalists grew up reading it, he's an idiot, and that's what they're afraid of. They say, oh, no, this is inspired literature. It can't have stupid mistakes. Well, generally speaking, the point of my book is they're not stupid mistakes, but they're not what you think either. If you look close, it's almost always apparent why they made certain changes. They want to have the story make a different point again and again. That does disturb inerrancy fans. They figure it's the camel's nose under the tent. How far are we going to take this? Yeah, they're right. That is what's at stake. But don't you want to understand the text? And I think their model prevents them from doing that. They have to come up, how many times did Jesus get denied by Peter? Well, come to think of it, he's talking to different people in a different order from one gospel to another. Maybe he denied Jesus 6 times to get them all in. One scholar said, really would have to be 8. And Strauss said, well, I'm not buying this, but if you want to be picky, it would have to be 9. Well, why? That would be kind of an insignificant mistake, one would think, if that's all it was. But these guys have other gospels in front of them. They could just copy that. They seem to be trying to make it different. And I explain why I think what they were up to, I think. But I am in the odd position in this book of being a kind of apologist for the Bible. I'm trying to say the way you guys frame it, you're making it look stupid. Nobody can accept your excuses for the inconsistencies. You need to understand why they are inconsistent. I'll shut up in a second, but you do have some mistakes occasionally that are just goofs. Like Matthew has, he deals with the execution of John the Baptist in a flashback, but he doesn't return to the same point in the narrative. He has it just continuing on. Well, that's a chronological goof. Who cares? But that's a goof. Or in the parable of the Great Supper, where he has, in the original version, apparently, Luke must be closer to it, the people, it's an old rabbinic story actually about a tax collector who wanted to improve his standing in the community, so he invited all the rich guys, but they said, gee, I can't really be seen at this guy's house, sorry, I'm not going to come, I just had my water heater burst and I can't go, he says, what? So he says, look, I got all this food. We might as well have somebody eat it. Go and bring in the street people. And they all ate. And in the original Jewish parable, this is why he gets a good funeral. It's like karma. He did do one good deed. So let's give him a good funeral. But in Matthew, it's a king who has the feast and invites everybody, but they turn him down and he is furious. So he says, okay, go out there, kill. Oh, and one of them kills the emissary. He said, kill those murderers and destroy their city. And they do. And afterward, well, we got all this food. Who are we going to invite? Bring in the poor. But the food is still hot on the table after you've had a military campaign and defeated a whole city. What did you microwave everything again? Like, he just wasn't thinking about that. So yeah, that's a stupid goof. Occasionally there are, but not nearly as many as there would have to be if inerrantists, or as I like to say about some skeptics, reverse inerrantists, if they're right, the Bible would just be peppered with these, and that's unfair. That's missing the point, I think.
And other contradictions that are frequently pointed out is, when was Jesus born? And Matthew puts Jesus born in Herod's reign, and the other one puts him in the being born during Judas the Galilean's revolt, which is about 10 years apart from one another. The same, you can't be born twice. And how many women went to the tomb?
Yeah, I think now there's a case where it's the woman at the tomb is just an inconsistency. I'm not even sure why that is. It does sound like it's possible that these women are already considered sort of saints, the holy women, and somebody was a particular devotee of Joanna, for instance, who was only in Luke, and she's in there a couple of times, and I've outlined what I think is the underlying story of Joanna. It's very much like the celibate women in the apocryphal Acts of the Apostles, who leave their husbands to follow the preacher, the Paul, Thomas, whoever, who is preaching the celibate gospel. No sex if you want to go to heaven. And slam the bedroom door and lock it. And the husband, who is highly placed, goes to the governor or the king and says, look, you got to stop this homewrecker. And so that's why the apostle is in jail, on trial, and executed. I think there was such a story with Jesus, and Joanna was the female disciple who left Chusa, her husband. So that's probably why she's there. Nobody else had heard of that story, but Luke had. So again, that's an intentional thing. You can add her to the list. The other ones, we don't even know who they're talking about. Because they all have the same name, but I would say that is an inconsistency. That's actually a contradiction. And who did they see Jesus at the tomb? Of course, according to some gospels, yes. According to some, no. That is a huge problem for apologists. You can't tell me, well, that's a minor difference. It's like two different people see in a car accident. No. You'd never get that accepted in a courtroom if you had a clashing testimony like that. So yeah, that is a serious contradiction in the true terms. The birth thing is fascinating. It seems pretty clear to me that they just didn't have a clue about how, when, and in what circumstances was Jesus born. Because on the other end of the story, we find different ancient writers who can't agree on that. Irenaeus thought Jesus died at the age of 49 in the reign of Claudius, not Tiberius. And some people apparently thought he had died 100 years earlier. Well, if they couldn't keep that straight, they couldn't have kept this straight. And that implies early on it just didn't matter. Like, why celebrate Christmas at all until you believe in the incarnation? And by the time of the Council of Nicaea, when they did, it was too late. Nobody remembered, assuming there was a historical Jesus, nobody remembered. It hadn't mattered before. But now that it did, well, some of our people are still celebrating Brumalia, the rebirth of Mithras. They're not going to stop. Let's say we co-opt that holiday, and so Christmas on December 25th, so, I mean, I think that may be why there is no real birth narrative. They're just like the genealogies. They just figured, Luke and Matthew did, that Jesus must have been descended from David, right? I mean, the Messiah is supposed to be. But he was known as Jesus of Nazareth, which would imply that was his hometown. How are we going to juggle those? And they came up with the best scenario they could. It was speculative, but there was so little to go on. Naturally, they didn't agree. So I don't know how much you want to make out of that. It does mean there is no real data for that. But I guess it plays hell with any idea of inspiration of the Bible in any meaningful sense, though, which is why they fear it.
I've wondered often if Irenaeus got confused because he read Suetonius mentioning that the Jews around 49, perhaps 50 A.D. Were instigated by a man called Chrestus, and that Emperor Claudius expelled them from Rome because of this. And I tend to think Irenaeus read that, thought that was Christ, and says, oh, he must have been alive during the reign of Claudius, so something's not right. So he moves Pilate's reign to that era, or extends it to that era, so that way Jesus can be crucified about a decade later than he would have been in the Gospels.
Yeah, that's very good. That's very cogent.
Yeah, that's what it looks like to me.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just said that's what it looks like to me.
Yeah, also, Alfred Loisy came up with an interesting idea. He thought that Irenaeus, who's a big fan of the Gospel of John, noticed certain numbers in there. When Jesus says, tear down this temple and I will raise it up again in 3 days. And what? It took 46 years to build this thing. You're going to raise it up in 3 days? I mean, I know you're supposed to be a carpenter, but come on. So Loisy said, 46 years, 3 days. Okay, it's not the same amounts, but 49, is that supposed to tell us something? And sure enough, there's another time in John where Jesus says, Abraham saw my day and was glad. And I said, what? Abraham is seeing you? You're not even 50 years old yet. And Abraham saw you? They obviously don't get it, like the foes of Jesus never do in the Gospel of John. Why did they not say, you're not even 40? Which would have made more sense given the what Luke says explicitly, Jesus was about 30. Why would they not say, I mean, it's like saying you're not 100 years old yet, if they're just jumping shooting, what's the word, jumping the gun. So Loisy thought maybe that's how Irenaeus got the idea. And then he said, now, why would that have been? And had this doctrine of recapitulation that Jesus, and this is, I think, big for Athanasius later, too, that Jesus assumed humanity. And for him to identify with everybody at every age, he must have lived to be in every period of life, including being older. So he was nearly 50 when he died. What the heck? That could be too, but what you've said makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I mean, I get what he's saying, and I thought about that before, about John seems to be putting Jesus' age very close to 50. But if that was the only thing that Irenaeus had seen, he probably would have just said, well, it turns out Jesus died at a much older age than we thought, but still in the reign of Tiberius. So, in my opinion, there has to have been another cause to make Irenaeus think that the crucifixion happened during the 40s, and that's Suetonius.
Yeah, that's very good. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, I might include that in the paper I'm writing that I'm going to send to you, or maybe make it a separate paper. I don't know. I'll have to figure that part out. Yeah, it's interesting that in the Gospels, like particularly John and Luke, there are different ages for Jesus, and that's just that does show that rather one wants to believe Jesus is historical or not, is that after the man supposedly lived, there was definitely a huge discontinuity between remembering the accurate details of his life to the mess that becomes the Gospels, which are in collision at nearly every point. It's just a mess. And even Professor Ehrman admits, like he often says in videos on record, it depends on which gospel you read. And that's very true. It does.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And that's the other thing that, like when some people claim that Jesus lived in another era, like, okay, yeah, I get it that there's later Christian, quasi-Christian material that puts Jesus in another time period, 100 years earlier, or like in the reign of Alexander Jannaeus, or somewhere later in the 1st century CE. Like somewhere in the Talmud, I don't remember where, there's a story about a Jesus that in his stepfather, I think it's his stepfather, yeah, it's his stepfather, called Paphos ben Yehuda, and he's upset because some kind of adultery happened, something like that. But then the story proceeds, and it talks about Rabbi Akiva, and he comes in there, and based on what Akiva says, this Paphos lived during the during and after the Bar Kokhba revolt, pretty much, something like that, which is strange, because if that's supposed to be our Jesus, which I'm not sure if we can